Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for this Wednesday evening primary election coverage. CEO Josh Fenton and I just gave a brief intro and was able to Skype into Matt Brown's headquarters where they're having their, election night party over at FET. GoLocal's Chelsea Gay, along with Juliet Barbera with the Matt Brown campaign, gave us a little update. She seems very optimistic. Let's start with Democratic strategist Rob Horowitz, and I also have Joseph Molina Flynn, head of the Rhode Island Latino PAC and immigration lawyer here in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. I've had them both here in studio before, so thank you, gentlemen, for coming back in on election night.
Thank you, Kate.
So let's start, Rob, as a veteran of a number of campaigns. The turnout looked a little low this morning, but we're hearing numbers that seem to be coming up to where things have historically been.
Yes, it looks like it's a little too early to tell. But it looks like it's going to at least track the 2014 numbers, which are pretty high for Rhode Island because you had a very competitive, on the Democratic side at least, three-way primary. On the other hand, you're not seeing the big boosts in turnout that you've seen around the country where turnout in Democratic primaries is up about 80%. Hard to tell from turnout. I guess I have a different opinion than Josh. I would say that Matt Brown needs high turnout. He needs new voters. So if turnout's about usual, I think it's still a very competitive race, but if you're Gina Raimondo, you kind of like that.
So if you're a betting guy, what have you been telling folks your thoughts on perhaps a percentage breakdown?
Percentage breakdown? Now, if I could really predict a percentage breakdown, I wouldn't be here. I'd be at my bookies, Kate, making a lot of money. But I would say that Gina Raimondo would not have spent I would estimate about $1 million in negative television and a negative direct mailing a day if the race wasn't relatively close. On the other hand, she's also building an insurance policy because we've seen races around the country with incumbents up by significant margins losing. Primaries are different than general elections because there's no party queues. So general election, you have a limited number of swing voters, and so they tend to be more stable. Primaries, since there's no queues, they can move very rapidly one way or the other. I think if you'd handicap it, you'd have to say that Gina Raimondo's the favorite. I think it's going to be relatively close.
So relatively close. Let's talk to Joseph here. The Rhode Island Latino PAC did endorse Governor Gina Raimondo, and you penned a mindsetter piece about are Latinos ready to embrace progressive candidates. Now, are you surprised of the ability of Matt Brown to sort of gain the type of momentum, whether or not it correlates into the votes that got the traction and got the interest of Governor Raimondo's campaign to have to, again, put those dollars, go on the attack against it? Were you surprised?
I wasn't surprised. I think in this day and age, you would be a fool if you didn't take elections seriously. In the state of Rhode Island, a few votes can swing an election. I mean, not usually at the governor's race level, but votes do make a difference. And I know from some of the work I did on the ground today that Matt Brown was out there giving rides to people to the polls along with several people on his campaign. And that could make a difference. And so I'm happy that there's choices, but I do think ultimately Governor Raimondo will be victorious.
So talk with us a little bit, Joseph. Earlier in the day, and as we acknowledged earlier, that the voter turnout looked particularly low, and as we said, it looked like a little bit of an upswing towards the evening. What have you heard since we talked last?
So I have heard that obviously the voter turnout got a little bit higher toward the end of the day. The rain was definitely a deterrent through most of the day. And I think once the rain calmed down, people felt like they could come out and stand in the voting lines. And so I'm glad to see that the numbers are up because a low voter turnout would have made this very, very unpredictable. But now I'm kind of excited to see what comes out of the night.
We're all excited. It's right 8 o'clock right now. We've got the clock in front of us here. We'll start getting some results, hopefully in short order, from the Board of Elections. But Rob, question for you as I keep going back to being veterans of campaigns. Depending on the outcome on the Democratic side tonight with Governor Raimondo, if she should emerge, and it is a close race against Matt Brown, and of course Spencer Dickinson, sort of an X factor there. There was some dollars put to his campaign sort of at the last moment too, perhaps in an effort to ensure a certain victory. But if it's a close race, and if either one emerges, how does that bode for the general election then if there's not an overwhelming mandate on the Democratic side?
I don't think that whether there's an overwhelming mandate matters. I think if you win by one vote or you win by 50,000 votes, you're still the Democratic nominee. Now, the issue that does occur and I've been in a couple of these movies, unfortunately, because it's a September primary. In New Jersey, other states, they do it in the spring. When it's a hard-fought race, there's always hurt feelings or tough feelings. So putting it back together quickly and getting everybody unified is not an easy task with a November election. So that, I think, would be more my concern than whatever the margin is tonight.
And Josh raised an interesting point, Josh being a veteran of a number of campaigns himself, of in the past it being sort of, as he said, an opportunity for party building that evening for everyone to sort of come together. Now we see those parties a couple days later. Usually it's the unifying party several days beyond the election. When did that pendulum swing that people said?
I think it changed. And being a veteran, no way of saying old, by the way, in this case. But I remember in 1994 when I was working for Murph York, campaign manager, we had a separate party because we were running against the incumbent governor. But then we came over to everyone used to come over to the Biltmore. So I don't know if that's really materially, it's changed some. It used to be more unified, but you do have more primary challenges up and down the ballot. I think that's what it's more about because if you're a candidate, you want to have something for your supporters first and then see what's happening. And it'll be interesting to see if everyone goes someplace central or not. Like, my guess is the answer to that would be a big NO.
Probably an NO. I mean, from the press standpoint here,
Yes.
after the recent elections, you always see the unity party begrudgingly taking place several days later where everyone's whipped to say, come together now because we're now facing a foe. Joseph, talk with us a little bit. The Latino PAC had endorsed a number of candidates, and let's go a little bit down ballot. What do you think are the races to watch this evening?
So I think the lieutenant governor's race is certainly going to be the most interesting race of the night, besides the governor's race. I think Regenberg has a lot of energy. He is the progressive's progressive. He had the ability to mobilize a lot of people. There were a lot of people at his headquarters today making phone calls for him. McKee is sort of the more establishment Democrat. He has the executive experience. He has been mayor of the city of Cumberland and brought that town along greatly. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what Rhode Island does in that race. The other thing is, Regenberg has talked about wanting to use that office differently than McKee uses it. And so you have to think about whether Rhode Islanders will put more stock into the small businesses, or if they will want the lieutenant governor's office to be used as a bully pulpit, as Regenberg has said that he will do. It's certainly an interesting proposition. I think they're both excellent candidates, and I think we'll be fortunate with either one of them. We did endorse McKee because he does have the executive experience, among other things, but I do think either one of them will be great in that office, and I think that is definitely a very interesting race to watch.
I think you'd have to say going into tonight, my guess, I'll go out on a limb. Been wrong before, as we know, I can be wrong again. My guess is you'd have to give Regenberg a little bit of an advantage simply because he also for a challenger, he has more money. So if if still in Rhode Island, even with all the new digital and social media, you've got a relatively older electorate. Television still matters, and the only message, at least I think, that's getting out there on television is Regenberg's, and it's both positive, and he's going after McKee. That may turn out to be the difference tonight.
So there is a lot of money at play, and we've often talked with folks here in the studio about the role of outside money. We've seen Stacy Schuster putting money towards some candidates here from out of state, $300,000 with covered transfers to PACs. Do you think the average voter cares about where the candidate gets the money from?
I think the political class cares about where the candidate gets the money from. I don't think a lot of voters pay attention to that. I do think where some voters would pay attention to that is issues, for example, like the fracking. If they know that the money is coming for things that are detrimental to their health or to their economy, then I think that does impact a little bit the way that the votes might swing. But I think other than that, whether they're coming from donors in New York or Kansas or wherever they may be, I don't think the average voter really cares about that.
I think it matters if you can make a case and it's a part of a pattern of other things. So in other words, if you're somebody who is very, very for the Second Amendment, for gun rights, and you get a bunch of money from the NRA, and you have an opponent who wants to make an issue of that, but you have to tell a story, because the other problem is how many voters are going to, I mean, GoLocal's doing a great job of covering this, but how many primary voters are paying that close attention? So that's the other issue. So you have to sort of decide as a campaign, do you want to make it an issue against your opponent? And you better, if you do, you don't want to be charged with hypocrisy. You want to make sure you're clean, and also can you make a broader case about your candidate?
Absolutely.
Now, I know from both of you gentlemen's standpoint, you tend to focus, we're talking a lot about the Democratic primaries here, but let's tack over to the Republican one. Clearly a numbers game, especially as far as the Republicans are concerned, because in that case, I mean, it holds true on the Democratic side, but particularly because of there's so few registered Republicans. What's your expectation tonight?
I don't know. My guess is it will about track 4 years ago, although Ken Block, I think, was a pretty energetic candidate, so he might have boosted it a little more. It was about 32,000 4 years ago. I think you're going to be in that movie, 30,000 plus. Unlike the Democratic primary, where I really believe Matt Brown needs, could be completely wrong, needs pretty significantly huge turnout to pull this off. I think if you're Pat Morgan, you want very low turnout, and if you're Fung, you want higher turnout, because she's got more of the hardcore conservatives. And we've seen races in Rhode Island where I'll get old one, go back in history, but where Lincoln and Rob Makeley was very much favored. It turned into, it was a pretty low turnout, and Lincoln had more of the conservatives and more of the traditional Republicans, and he won it about 2-1 in a low turnout race. So you have to, it depends on, especially on the Republican side, because there's so few voters relatively. It really, turnout's, I think, really critical.
Let's talk a little bit about the Latino PAC's basically endorsement process of having a questionnaire sent out to candidates and responses back. How would you see the GOP working with the very diverse Latino community and appeal? Is there any appeal there that cross-cuts across the aisle?
We were sort of disappointed in that not a lot of Republicans chose to participate in our PAC process, even though we are a nonpartisan PAC and we would have been glad to endorse the right candidate on the right issues. Our platform was developed by a platform committee on issues that are central to the Latino community. And as I mentioned in the piece I wrote for GoLocal this week, Latinos can swing right on certain issues. And so the fact that the community in Rhode Island isn't as engaged with the Latinos when it comes to the Republicans is a little disheartening. But I think there are some votes out there for them to get. And if they're smart, when it comes time for the general, they'll go after those votes too, because Latinos are not homogenous. They don't always vote Democratic. They don't always vote on the immigration issue. And so it's 15% of the voters are Latino. And so I think everybody would be smart to court the Latino vote, because they can swing an election if the need arises.
Now, you took a particular affront with Mayor Alan Fung's immigration position and came out quite strongly on it.
Of course, I'm an immigration lawyer, and that's my bread and butter, and I'm an immigrant myself. I was undocumented previously. And so for Mayor Fung to say that he's going to use his office, if he shall win, to deputize the police, the state police, to carry out immigration policy, not only do I feel that's contrary to constitutional law, but that's also imperiling the lives of my clients, and I can place myself where they are now because I was once there. And so I take that very personally, and I wish that Mayor Fung, coming from an immigrant background himself, would take a little bit of a deeper dive into the humanity of the situation and not just make statements because they align with President Trump's statements.
Any thoughts here, as we know primaries generally shift to the fringe of the party, that there be any potential for him to swing back towards the center if he emerges from the primary on a position that you'd be more amenable to?
I think if he does, he'll get called out for pandering during the primary. I think if Governor Raimondo emerges tonight, she's very good at doing that. And so I don't think that that's a game that Alan Fung would want to play. I think he needs to stick to his position. And I think that will turn out some voters that he's courting. I just think it alienates a lot of the more Republicans that are more to the center.
He must have been somewhat concerned about the primary, because that's not just speaking, and I agree with you substantively, speaking strictly politically, it's not a good general election position. I wouldn't be surprised, having watched Alan Fung over the years, to watch him soften it a bit. I agree he won't go completely, but to watch him soften in a bit, because he's going to have to move. He doesn't have to move much, because he's basically been in, I think, the witness protection program for the primary, best I could tell, but which may or may not be smart. I'm not sure it is. But for the general election, I think you'll see a move. I mean, the other thing I just wanted to put on the table is I think I wouldn't be surprised tonight, looking at what's going on in the country with women winning a lot of seats, insurgent women, to see some switches in the General Assembly and some incumbents go down. And I don't have a specific prediction about
You don't have the sheet in front of
which
you.
one, but I think you could probably count on a few, just given what's going on around the country.
Moira Walsh's seat, as one implied, that to look at potentially.
Yeah, and my guess is she'll prevail. But
Yeah.
but I think there's some challenges against incumbents in the legislature, that given how them primaries are playing out around the country, given the anti-Trump fervor, given this sort of at least preference for women, all things being equal, I think we'll see a few. I don't know if you even call them upstates, but a few incumbents go down there.
Well, now we're getting 10 past 8. We're all chomping at the bit to see when returns start coming in from the Board of Elections. Any final thoughts before we welcome our next guest into the studio?
So I'm just very excited to see what comes out of tonight. I think no matter what, on the Democratic side of things, people do need to come together after the election, because the risk is too high for the general, particularly if Mayor Fung emerges victorious. So I do think that Matt Brown supporters would be well served to come to Gina Raimondo's side if she wins, and vice versa. I think we need unity in the Democratic Party in Rhode Island. We don't need a faction Democratic Party. It's not that big of a state for there to be two significant factions, and so I just hope that people will take that to heart.
I think it's great that we've got a few really competitive races that are interesting tonight. And I think, we can look forward to what promises to be in the governor's race, no matter who emerges here, a fairly competitive general election. And you can't count, I think he probably doesn't win, but there's going to be a guy who's watching tonight and probably enjoying it. He's got the popcorn. I don't know if he's on his boat.
Is he on the boat?
He might be on the boat. Who knows?
Kind of a warm day
Maybe
today,
having whatever that cocktail is named after him. But Joe
Chilling on the
Trillo,
rocks.
who's going to have Joe on the rocks, who's going to have something to say about what occurs here as well.
Well, we're going to keep tabs on that moving forward, but of course, we're keeping an eye on the election results coming in this evening. So I want to thank Rob Horowitz for coming in, and of
Thanks,
course,
Kate.
Joseph Molina Flynn
Thank you,
as
Kate.
well, here into the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. We're going to be back with more guests talking as we, again, get some election results in here shortly.